of God who is incarnate in this human being. So I think making sense of that has been a major problem for Christianity for 2,000 years.
But so, as far as I understand it, you wouldn't accept the idea that Jesus was resurrected from the dead. You would accept life after death with regards to bodily resurrection or a disembodied soul. But am I right in saying that you would accept with Jesus the ideas of eternal life, which he said, in a sense, the eternal life is the ethical lifestyle, something which Kierkegaard picks up. Only in the ethical is there eternal life. Some students may find that slightly strange, that you do believe in eternal life, but you don't believe in life after death. What do you mean by eternal life in your understanding of Jesus?
Well, eternal life, I mean, the term eternity, in some understandings, refers to time going on forever and ever. And so eternal life is an extension of this life. And to be honest, I don't see the evidence for that. Maybe I'll be surprised when I find myself knocking on the lid of the coffin or whatever it is that happens to me. Maybe I will be surprised, but I don't see the evidence for that. But that's not the only meaning and sense of words like eternal and eternity. And I think to talk about eternal life and eternity in this world is to have an aspiration for wholeness and identity in human life and in the life of the individual. That if ever fulfilled, and I'm not sure any one individual could completely fulfill this or reach this stage of total integrity, total self-identity, total consistency, but that's an aspiration that I think is at the very core of the moral life. And if it's at the very core, dignifying it by saying trying to find eternity over against the fact that life's a series of episodes in time and space. But if you think of it only as a series of episodes in time and space, well, that's the same kind of life that animals have, that amoeba have, that rocks have, if they have life at all. They have an existence through time and space. But I think in the case of human beings, the aspiration for something called, and I could spell this out, identity and integrity, is what I would mean by striving for eternal life.
So is it a different quality of life, a life that can't be trivialized in the here and now, which upholds those, not Platonic ideals,
yes.
But these important principles which you mentioned, such as justice, honesty, integrity, the virtues. To that extent, do you uphold an idea of virtue ethics in your approach at all? Are you sympathetic to them?
Yeah, yes, I am. Yes, I am. I mean, I on the whole don't use the language of that, but I think it's very parallel to what the people who talk in that way are doing, because it is it's a quality of life, it's a quality of response to the realities with which we live that I would mean by searching for eternal life.
So, coming back to God, Jesus and belief, you actually draw out the idea of the eternal life, a life that can't be trivialized. You say the good life can be lived, in a sense, sub specie eternitatis.
Yes.
Now, I've got two questions really. What do you understand the term sub specie eternitatis to mean? And how are you using it? Are you using that as a metaphor?
Well, in terms of what it means, it's a nice Latin term. I got it from my reading of Kierkegaard, basically. And I think what he's doing with it is he is suggesting there is much more to human life than just what the old song used to say, one damn thing after another. You know, it's more than a series of incidents, more than just existing in space and time. But what he wanted to distinguish, and I'm wholly with him on this, is he wanted to distinguish between saying, well, it's an aspiration to live life in search of eternal life in the way as I've just been discussing. That's an aspiration we have. One of the problems I think most forms of theism have is that they assume somewhere that you can step outside of space and time and view human life as if from beyond. And maybe only it's God that can do this, but they always have a guru or a book or a revelation that says, I've got a line, I've got a hot line to eternity, and I can view human life from eternity, and that's why what you're doing is mistaken and you should do it this way. That's what Kierkegaard was, I think, rejecting, and certainly it's what I'm rejecting. I don't think we have that hot line. That doesn't mean to say you just throw up your hand and say, well, we're just like the animals, we're just like a lump of matter. We are living with the prospect of seeing more in human life than that.
So, with regards to the good, as it were, is that something which is relative according to culture, or is there a universal understanding of goodness, be it historically, or are you sort of within a Western tradition?
Well, I think it's relative in the sense that we all live at a particular point in space and time, and we're all brought up within a particular culture. And if your culture has much going for it, and any culture that lasts some time has something going for it, then you'll have a particular understanding of where you see moral criteria in operation, what you see as important, what you see as worthwhile. Any one culture, and this is where relativities come in, has limits to its perceptions, constrained by its history. But you don't need to get agonized and terribly distressed about that. That doesn't mean to say it doesn't matter what you do, but it's a warning saying, well, you've got these insights. And basically, I was brought up in Western Christian tradition. We've got these insights. Don't let's throw them out. But remember that they may not be, so to speak, the insights of God looking from outside into human life. That we're approaching the best understanding we can have of them. And ideally, there may well be, as Plato would say, a form of the good to which we all aspire. But remember, Plato on the whole tended to say, nonetheless, what we have round about it is a degree of illusion and uncertainty about what that is.
So in our current age of spin, would you be happy to be labelled a type of Christian Platonist, making sense of Jesus and the Christology, not with reference to God, but with reference to the good?
Well, if you're looking for titles, and a number of people have said to me, "Oh, you're the last living Platonist," and I am up to this point that I do believe the notion of what transcends space and time as morally important. I do believe that is critically important for how we see ourselves. But I don't go as far as Plato does in some of his writings, and don't forget, there's a lot of books attributed to him, and they do vary. In some of his writings, he seems to say, well, there is this form of the good, and we can actually finally, if we get the method right, have a vision of what this is like. I don't think that's so. And that's not just because we ain't smart enough yet. That's because we are human beings who are conditioned by space and time.
But you are prepared to say, perhaps ambitiously, that if a religious belief runs counter to a moral belief, it is to that extent unacceptable. It's your fourth criterion in God, Jesus and belief.
Yes.
That's quite an ambitious, authoritative thing to say.
I put my hands up to that. Yes, absolutely. A surrender, that's absolutely true.
On what basis are you prepared to say that the good can have authority over religious claims?
Well, in my own case, and in the case of my friends, the people I know, the people I admire, if I were asked, well, could X or Y live without the additional religious belief, whatever it is, that the Bible is the revealed book, or that the Pope is infallible, or that the Archbishop of Canterbury is the best fount of wisdom we've got in the country? Could they live without that more easily than without, when they see suffering in a small child, they're appalled? Then I would go for the latter. Because I think these are, and this is a Humean point, not much is made of this in David Hume. It's very important in his philosophy. He said, unless what we might call the moral emotions function in someone, there's no real prospect of civilization taking off. I mean, that's a very big claim. I'd have to unpack it in Hume. But basically he was saying that if you put in front of most human beings an example of gratuitous pain and suffering, and they're not repelled by that, then there's something wrong. And equally, if you put in front of most human beings an example of altruistic kindness, going the second mile, he that hath two coats giving, and so on, and they're not somehow pleased to see that and react positively, then again there's something missing in that human being. And I think those are the building blocks of not just the individual moral life, but actually of civilized society. And I find them a stronger foundation than some of the things that are said in churches' sermons and by religious leaders.
So my understanding then is you'd be very sympathetic and share common ground with Iris Murdoch, who was saying that the idea of the good is to be understood as the source of light, which reveals to us things as they really are.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use that language, but I recognize and understand what it is that she's trying to say, that if your perception, and I suppose I'm a bit more Aristotelian here, if you see a good act, you respond positively and you want to expand its influence, you want other people to do that. And that's an insight coming from the perception of goodness in the particular instance. And that's Aristotelian, really, as much as more than Platonic. Whereas she still, I think, has this dream of a final vision of the goodness, that if you attain to that stage, then all else will be illuminated. And doubtless that's true. But I think because, going back to Kant, which is why I say it's so important, we're conditioned by space and time, we will never actually achieve that. So what you can see within space and time is particular examples of goodness and of evil. And what I share with Murdoch is the importance of clarity of perception of these. And that seems to me to provide a stronger base for building a life, and therefore the reason for saying, well, actually, if it's my perception, this is back to Ivan, of the suffering of this child, or the claim that somehow it's for the ultimate good, the one, I think, is more important than the other, which is why, going back to the book, that's a fourth criterion. It's the moral perception in the ultimate takes center stage.
So the idea, which is quite fascinating, that Aristotelian insight, in a sense that we use our reason, we select the appropriate arete, the appropriate virtues.
That's right.
We get into the habituation of doing it.
Yes.
We have a disciplined appetite. So
yeah.
Excess is error, deficiency is fault. We put it into practice, and that will lead to human flourishing. The idea of eudaimonia.
Acts form habits, habits form character. That was the Aristotelian progression. And this is very important in education, and I don't think anybody's really tackling this in relation to what we call moral education, whether it's in schools or elsewhere. But I think this is a very important basis for trying to build up a way of having that kind of education in schools, for example.
But in a sense, there's a problem with this nice vision.
It's
called, in a sense, human nature. We hear of, in your book again, God Uses Belief, you quote Robert Bolt's play, A Man for All Seasons. And we have two characters, Thomas More and the ambitious young rich. And he comes to More and says, what should I do? And he's looking for insight, looking for direction, and More perceptively can see that sort of weakness. He's wanting greed, and says to him, become a teacher. You would be a good teacher. Your students would know it, and God would know it. Not a bad public. We're not surprised when Rich doesn't follow Thomas More's advice. In a sense, what do you see as being the telos, the end purpose of human beings, and how can we overcome that darker side, which may be ambition or greed?
Well, it's there in virtually all of us, certainly. I know it myself. And there are some striking individuals of whom that seems less true than others. But it's just part of the reality we confront. What I see as a way of life, or a pattern of life I would commend, that can, I believe, help in overcoming some of that, is to seek, and these are two key words for me, an identity and an integrity, so that actually making another $1 million isn't going to add a lot to the quality of your life, if you believe, or if it's coming out of basically prostituting your talents, or if it's coming out of cutting across or against something that would alter your perception of that suffering child or that fine act of goodness. And if what you are to do blurs those perceptions, then maybe that's the sign that you're begin to make the wrong decisions. Now, we all do that all the time. We make wrong decisions. But if you're looking for, well, what are the guiding posts? That's one of the peg I would put in the ground here and another one over there. Marvelous example of what I mean in just taking delight in what is good in human life was in an Ingmar Bergman film, The Seventh Seal. And this is a story about somebody, a knight being pursued by death and so on. And in his travels, one of the things he sees is a young couple